The path of the just is like a shining light, shining brighter, bright as the noonday.
Hello and welcome to Walking in the Word. We're going to finish our discussion on Josiah, who reformed, the king that reformed Israel and Judah. And then we're going to see how he reinstituted the Passover celebration. And so this is a happy day in the lives of Israel and Judah because of the Reformation that God was able to perform through this young king. So Alton, start us out.
Well, there was a lot of work to be done, and in case you didn't know, there's a lot of work to be done in you. And God wants to take you from conception to the promised land. And the promised land isn't just a location, or it's more than a goal, because once you get there, it keeps getting better. Right now, I'm speaking to my church about the book of Hebrews. Everything in the book of Hebrews gets better. The word is better is in there about 13 times, I think I counted. There's a better testament. There's a better, everything was made better by Jesus dying on the cross and resurrecting. And so in 2 Kings 23:24, it says that also Josiah put away or wasted the workers with familiar spirits, wizards, the household images and idols, and all the abominations that were seen in the land of Judah and Jerusalem, that he might perform the words of the law written in the book of the law found by Hilkiah the priest in the house of the Lord. And so what are these familiar spirits and things like that? You say, well, I don't do that crazy stuff. Well, familiar spirits basically are things you've gotten used to, and you don't even know they're wrong, but you've done them for so long, it's part of your life. And so we have to find out, Paul talked about putting away certain things like wrath and anger. These are things that come easy to us because we're familiar with them. But they're not things that God wants us. He wants us to be slow to anger. And so he has to put that in us. We have to spend time with him and kind of let him rub off on us, so to speak. When you talk about computers, let him download who he is into you. And that takes time. You just got to shut down some of your activities and go get alone with God. It's so important that it's life or death. It's not just something that's nice to do or I wish I could find time. No, make time. Put it ahead of schedule. Make it the priority. Okay? There's so many things we do that are not producing any fruit in our life. And we need to get aware of that and put it aside and allow God to change you. Okay? A lot of people think we're going to be changed on the way up. No. You're going to go from mortal to immortality and from corruption to incorruption. That has to happen now. And then you'll be changed on the way up. Okay? But all these things, wizards, I like sports, but I'm always wondering why people do things for luck. Either you're good at it or you're not good at it. And your team is good or it isn't good. It has nothing to do with, doing certain things, and that has nothing to do with it. You might think it does, but it doesn't. And so don't conduct your life like that. Okay? I remember when the Tigers were really good and won the World Series and all that. You know, Sparky Anderson, if you watched him when he'd walk out to the mound to talk to the pitcher or walk back, he would not step on a line. Okay? That was his wizardry. You say, well, the Tigers won. Yeah, well, he did it all his life and they didn't win all the time. And so these things are just vain imaginations, okay? If we would go to Isaiah 46, is an interesting chapter. It starts out by saying, Baal bows down. Baal is another word for Baal, okay? And Nebo stoops. Remember Nebo? There was Mount Nebo. Their idols were on the beasts and on the cattle. The things you carried about have become a load, a burden for the weary. Okay? If God is a burden to you, step back and see what your attitude is about God, who you think God is. Because you may be carrying around an idol, something that looks like God, and you've given it godly powers in your life, but it's not God. It's the enemy coming around as an angel of light, trying to convince you he is God. He's not. He's wanted that job ever since he was conceived. He wanted Jesus to bow down to him. He tried to get Jesus to jump through his hoops, make this stones bread, and jump off the pinnacle, and you'll be saved. And I'll give you all these kingdoms if you bow down. No, God's not going to do that, and you shouldn't either, because you are the prince. Okay? But when these idols get so burdensome that the animals collapse under the weight of them, they can't even carry them around. And I got news for you. If you got to carry your God around, you don't got God, the God. You got one of them wannabes, okay? He's carrying you. That's the way it's going to be for a while. If you have to carry him, and if it's a burden for you to come to church, he says, my burden is easy, my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. And that word easy doesn't mean it's no resistance. It means it's useful. See, you can work your tail off for Egypt and build their pyramids for them, and what do you get out of it? Nothing. Blisters. Death. But God's yoke is easy. It's useful. There's going to come some good out of it. Okay? It's going to be fruitful. It's going to produce some kind of fruit. And so if what's going on in your life isn't, how would you say, satisfying, okay? Everything about God should satisfy you. It should be in abundance. And when things aren't working the way you think that should go, at least check into it. Find out. Get that book of the law, so to speak, which is your Bible now, and look at it and say, well, this isn't supposed to be happening this way, and find out why. Maybe it is supposed to happen that way and you just don't know. But when you have something, a standard to go by, now you can say, is this a tradition of men? Or is this something I should be doing or thinking? Okay? A lot of idols are not just objects, like a car or something. A lot of people think that's an idol. That can be an idol, but your wrong ideas about God are idols. And when you don't want to move along with God, if you come to a certain point and you say, I'm good enough, and you stop, that's an idol. You just set up an idol. God is more than that. He wants to give you more. And so don't stop along the way. You don't quit at 10th grade. A lot of kids when I was growing up would think, I can get a job pumping gas. And I don't need to go past 16, and they drop out. Well, if you drop out of this, you're going to lose a lot. And they found out that nowadays you can't even get that job. Everybody's pumping their own gas. So it isn't even an option anymore to drop out. So let's see, where were we? Okay, they stooped, they bowed down together. They could not deliver the burden, but they themselves have gone into captivity. Okay? You become a slave to that thing. And you're not getting any benefit. A slave gets no benefit from his work. But the closest you can say is, I don't get whipped. And so that's a negative thing, basically. Then it goes on to say in verse 5, to whom will you compare me and make me equal and compare me that we may be alike? They pour gold out of the bag and weigh silver out of the measuring rod and hire a goldsmith and he makes it a god. They fall down, yea, they bow down. They carry it on the shoulder. Like I said, if you got to carry your God around, something's wrong. You need to trade in that God for a real one. And so they carry it on the shoulder, they carry it and set it in its place. God He's all over the universe. If you got something like this and put it there and say, that's its place, what do you got? Nothing. And it stands, it shall not move from its place. Yet, yes, one shall cry to it, yet it cannot answer nor save him out of his trouble. If what you think is God is not delivering you, change gods. Find out. Say, this God is not working. I want him out of my temple. I want the real God. I want the one that heals. I want the one that saves. I want the one that changes me from glory to glory until I come to that measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. Okay? These things they're a joke. And the problem is we've been taught some things that are a joke. We have to be careful. If they don't line up with the book that was in your temple, then maybe you ought to reconsider some things and look for a paradigm change in your life. And I'm sure you will find that it will be very satisfying and bring you up to speed in God, because you don't want to lag. You don't want to be behind God. You want to keep up with him as he goes along. In Habakkuk 2:18, he says, what does an image profit if its maker has carved it? A molten image and a teacher of lies. For does the maker trust in his work on it to make dumb idols? They can't even talk to you. You can talk to them all you want. You talk to you're blue in the face to the brick wall. It doesn't answer you back. You say, well, God doesn't answer my prayers. Are you listening? You got to listen with the Spirit. You got to ask according to his word. Okay, if I abide in you and you abide in me, you can ask what you will. A lot of people like to leave that part out. Well, there's always conditions. And so he will answer you, I guarantee it. And some people say, well, sometimes the answer is no. Well, maybe he does. But he wants to give you, if you delight yourself in the Lord, it says, he'll give you the desires of your heart. That's a two-edged sword, I say. He'll give you what you ask, but he'll also put in your heart what to ask. Okay? He puts in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. So that's interesting. The workman overlays it with gold. That's God's divinity. And he puts silver. That's redemption. Okay? But if he's making a false god, it's not there. It's just window dressing. And it talks in one place about how a man that is so poor he can't even buy an oblation. He'll go find a piece of wood that won't rot. Okay? He's looking like he's trying to build the Ark of the Covenant. And overlays it with gold and puts chains on it. And he looks for a man to fashion what he has in his mind. Don't be a church hopper. Okay? Don't be looking for somebody that wants to match up with what you think. You better start thinking and match up with what the Word says. And so, at this point, I'm going to give it over to my lovely wife.
Thank you, honey. So yes, as Alton just was speaking of molten images, we talked last time about the god Moloch, which demanded demanded the children that would be sacrificed, the blood of those children. He demanded that. And so the parents, even the Jewish parents, would sacrifice their firstborn in order to guarantee prosperity for their family. So what a demonic idea to begin with. And this took place, we saw last time that Josiah went into a town called Topheth, and that's where the idol of Moloch was set up. And it was in the valley of Hinnom. Now, as we said, Moloch was a metal god, so he would have been molten and poured, hollowed. Fire was put inside of his belly, and his arms extended for the parents to lay their child and just watch it burn to death. And that would supposedly appease Moloch. Well, this valley of Hinnom was a deep valley. And before Josiah had purged that of Moloch worship, the valley was all but full of the babies, the dead babies. What a sickening thought. But you have to wonder now. 1972 is when abortion was instituted in the United States as a federally accepted thing. You have to wonder since then, would the Valley of Hinnom be filled up if all the babies that have been aborted in America were placed there today? And I challenge you to do research on the original way that abortions were performed in America was called a hypertonic saline abortion. That meant that salt water was injected into the womb of the mother and the baby literally burned from the salt. Very much of a parallel to what happened in the Moloch religion. So you see that Josiah had to purge the land. God had had enough of this idolatry, and he wanted his people back. He so desperately wanted his people back. So I want to look for a minute, as last time we talked about Ezekiel 8. I want to go into chapter 9. If you remember, Ezekiel was taken up in a vision by the angel of the Lord, and he was shown the idolatry that was going in, the duality of worship, that Israel and Judah were not only going to the temple of the Lord, but they were also serving other gods as well in the privacy of their lives. So what happens in the next chapter of Ezekiel after he has this encounter with the angel is we see what is known as the inkhorn man. He, during this time of Israel, was there, marking those that sighed and cried and moaned for the abominations of their people. But I truly believe that we are in that era as well, that now there's an inkhorn man that God is commissioning to go throughout our country and marking those who sigh and cry for the abominations of our nation that have led us to where we are now in so many ways, disregarding and dishonoring God. In verse 24, it says of chapter 23 of 2 Kings, as Alton read, that Josiah sent and purged the land. He purged it even of those who were dabbling in familiar spirits and wizardry and such. And so he did the job that God commissioned him to do. And the happy news is this: we don't just end Josiah's story there, but then he, at age 26, again, this very young king, at age 26, he reinstated the Passover into Israel. Of course, you know the story. God sent the death angel in Egypt to pass over the houses where the mark of the blood of the Lamb was over the doorposts. And so there was a marking in Exodus in the time of Israel in Egypt, a marking with the blood. There was also in Ezekiel the marking of the inkhorn man. You can't miss the parallel there. And the marking was to pass over, that there would be no judgment for idolatry and judgment on God's people that were marked. Let me just pause that for a minute, and let's go back to Exodus chapter 14. So after the blood of the Lamb marked those who were God's people, they left Egypt. But let me read chapter 14, some of chapter 14 of Exodus, because this is the continuation of Passover. Passover started, the celebration of the concept of Passover started when they ate the lamb with their families in their houses. But it continued on even until the wilderness as they were being delivered from Pharaoh and the bondage and the idolatry of Egypt. So Exodus chapter 14 and verse 4 says, I will harden. Now this is God speaking to Moses. He said, I will harden Pharaoh's heart that he will follow Israel. And I will be honored through Pharaoh and all of his army, so that the Egyptians may know what? That I am Jehovah. They're an idolatrous nation, but they're going to see that I am Jehovah, and I'm going to be glorified and honored even through what I do to Pharaoh. The king of Egypt was told that the people fled, verse 5 says, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the servants, the people of God. And they said, why have we done this to let Israel go from serving us? They had a good thing going with God's people being their slaves for 400 years. So they realized, after God had hardened Pharaoh's heart, they'd realized that they wanted to go pursue Israel and bring them back into captivity. And he made his chariot ready, Pharaoh, and he took his people with him. Pharaoh took his army after Israel in the wilderness. And then Exodus 14:7 says, he took 600 chosen chariots, all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over every one of them. Verse 8 says, but Jehovah hardened the heart of Pharaoh of Egypt, and he pursued the sons of Israel as they went out with a high hand. They went out with the spoils of Egypt, if you remember. But the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and the chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen and his army. And they overtook the people of Israel, camping by the sea. Now notice, very strategic where God had placed them. Our Father loves a little bit of drama. So he told them to encamp right in front of the mountain where there was an idol set up to Baal, interestingly enough. He's Got a lot of imagery going on here. And so they were found there by the army of Egypt before the god of Baal-Zephon. Verse 10 says, and Pharaoh drew near. He drew near. The sons of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were very afraid. And the sons of Israel cried out to Jehovah. Now at this point, they turned on Moses and said, it would have been better if we'd stayed in Egypt and been in bondage. What kind of logic is that? They were so afraid. But Jehovah says no. He says, just watch what I do. So in verse 13, Moses said to the people, do not fear, stand still and see the salvation of God. Jehovah shall fight for you, and you shall be silent. Jehovah said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Speak to the sons of Israel that they go forward, but lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the sons of Israel shall go on dry land through the midst of the Red Sea. But now notice what it says. This is the climax here. Exodus 14:17 says, and behold, I am about to harden the heart of Pharaoh and the Egyptians, and they shall follow Israel. And I will get honor for myself, again, through Pharaoh. I'm going to glorify my name, and I'm going to bring honor through the act of Pharaoh and all of his army, his chariot, his horsemen in the Red Sea. So God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. We see a parallel. There are world leaders that God is hardening their hearts right now to try to overcome the saints of the Most High. God will have his way, and he will do it in a dramatic fashion. The Red Sea defeat of Egypt came crashing down suddenly. God is the God of suddenlies. I'm hearing that word more often than not right now. God is about to do a suddenly. He's about to move, and it'll be a sudden thing. It will be a dramatic thing. And then verse 13 of chapter 14 says, the enemies that you see today, you will see no more forever. When God destroys his enemy, he doesn't do half of a job. He annihilates them. Just like when he had Josiah to purge Israel, he didn't just knock over the idols. He would burn them. He would grind them into powder. He would scatter bones over the idolatrous altars so that they wouldn't be used again. He would defile them. And so God uses his enemy. He hardened the heart of Pharaoh. I want to read Proverbs 16, verse 4. It says this, the Lord has made everything for its own purpose. Even, the Amplified says, the wicked according to their role for the day of evil. Now, if you fast forward, Judas Iscariot's a perfect example of that. He's the one that betrayed Jesus. He was used of God. His evil heart was used of God to perform a task. But then God deals with his enemies. He doesn't just let them run rampant. So God did deliver Israel when they came out of Egypt. He is going to deliver his people. He will bring justice on behalf of his enemies. So back to the story of Josiah. We're coming to the end of what we know of his acts as king. When we look at 2 Kings 23:21, Josiah, as we said, restores the Passover. So let me end with this. And the king commanded all the people, saying, prepare the Passover to Jehovah your God, as it is written in the book of Jehovah, the book of the covenant. Surely there was not held such a Passover from the days of the judges who judged Israel, nor in all the days of the king of Israel, nor the kings of Judah. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, he was only age 26 at this time, this Passover was held to Jehovah in Jerusalem. And there was no king, this is the last that we hear of him, there was no king like him before Josiah, who turned to Jehovah with all of his heart, and with all of his soul, and with all of his might, according to all the law of Moses. And after him, none rose up like him. So the end of Josiah's story is this. He reinstituted the celebration of Passover. Again, the climax of Passover, as it happened originally, was the deliverance at the Red Sea. When God dealt with his enemies and he swallowed them up, then the Passover celebration, the Passover season in their lives was complete. And so we have a happy ending to Josiah's story. We want to leave this with you. We hope this has been an encouragement and a challenge as you think on the things that we've studied today. So God bless you. We send our love to you in Jesus' name.